All right, hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to unlock some next level DaVinci Resolve secrets? I'm talking about going way beyond those beginner tutorials. This one's for the pros, the color wizards, the timeline sorcerers who really want to get the absolute most out of Resolve 19. Yeah, you guys know the basics by now. We're not going to waste time with keyboard shortcuts and basic trimming. We're going deep, uncovering those hidden gems, those workflow hacks that can transform the way you edit. And you've given us quite the treasure map for this deep dive, with these notes you took on that Ultimate VFX List video
Yeah.
and the DaVinci Resolve 19 manual.
Oh, that video. A gold mine of crazy effects and techniques, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, who has time to go through all of that?
Right.
We're sifting through it all for you, unearthing the good stuff, the real game changers, especially for those who live and breathe Resolve. So think of us as your guides, your DaVinci Sherpas, leading you through the peaks and valleys of this incredibly powerful software.
We're talking about the kind of stuff that can shave hours off your workflow, make your edits look and sound incredible, and maybe even make you feel like you've unlocked a secret level of DaVinci mastery.
And who doesn't love that feeling?
Exactly.
Now, something that caught my eye in your notes from that video was that smoothness setting when you're working with stabilized footage. Because we all know just slapping on a basic stabilizer can make things look, well, a little robotic.
Oh, absolutely. No one wants their footage to look like it was shot by a robot. What's cool here is how Resolve analyzes your footage, at a micro level to detect those tiny jitters that make a shot feel unnatural. The smoothness parameter, it's like fine-tuning that analysis, so you smooth out the bumps, but you're keeping those natural camera movements that give it life.
Yeah, finding that balance between fixing the problems and maintaining the organic feel of the shot.
Precisely.
Now, I also noticed you highlighted a few audio features. We all know Resolve has really upped its audio game, but what's got you excited?
Okay, this is huge for those big projects with tons of audio sources. You can have different audio formats, stereo, 5.1 surround, mono, all within the same clip.
Whoa, wait, seriously?
Seriously, it's a game changer. Resolve handles it all in one place. No more messing around with separate audio files, worrying about compatibility issues. It just works.
That's incredible. For complex projects, that must save so much time and headache.
Absolutely. And speaking of streamlining, let's talk smart bins. These things are like having a personal assistant for your media. You can automatically tag and sort your footage based on anything, scene, shot type, camera used, even the time of day if you want.
It's all about using metadata, right? That's the key.
Exactly. And with metadata variables, you can even create those dynamic clip names that update automatically. So your clip name can include the scene, shot, take similar, and super helpful when you're knee-deep in a complex project.
That's amazing, especially when you're dealing with hours and hours of footage.
Absolutely. And speaking of handling massive amounts of data, let's talk about proxy media. It might seem simple, but creating those lightweight versions of your clips can make a huge difference in performance, especially with those big demanding raw files.
Yeah, proxies are essential, especially for us folks working with those resource-intensive formats. But what's cool is that you don't even have to create those proxies within DaVinci Resolve. You can do it externally, which makes collaboration a lot smoother.
Absolutely. Flexibility is key. And while we're talking about tricky but important concepts, let's talk about data levels. This is one that even experienced editors can get tripped up on, that whole full levels versus video levels thing.
Oh yeah, that can be a head scratcher.
Huh.
Seems simple at first, but it can lead to all sorts of problems if you're not careful.
Definitely. It all comes down to how your image data is being represented digitally. And if your data levels are mismatched, it can be a disaster. Clipped blacks, blown out highlights, and your footage just looks off. DaVinci Resolve is smart. It tries to help you out, but understanding those data level settings gives you, the editor, the ultimate control.
It's about understanding the nuances so you can be confident your images are being represented correctly throughout your entire workflow. No nasty surprises later on.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here, helping you master those nuances.
Right. Now, in your notes, you mentioned some of those hidden gem features in DaVinci Resolve. Those features you might not even know exist unless someone points them out to you. What's something that caught your eye?
Okay, here's one that seems small, but is a game changer if you use external monitors for your grading. You can display the timecode directly on your scopes. No more glancing back and forth between your scopes and the interface. It's subtle, but so helpful.
Seriously. That's one of those features where once you start using it, you can't imagine life without it. It's all about staying in the flow, right? What else did you find hiding in the depths of the Resolve manual?
Okay, how about the source match frame function?
Okay.
So you're in the source viewer. looking at a specific frame. One click, and bam. Resolve finds that exact frame in your timeline.
Wait, really? No more scrubbing through hours of footage to find that one perfect frame.
Gone. Especially helpful when you're working on a project with a ton of footage.
Those time savers really add up. Speaking of which, you also jotted down a note about render in place. It's not exactly hidden, but it's one of those features people often overlook.
For sure. But it's amazing for effects-heavy projects. Render in place lets you essentially pre-render a section of your timeline, all those effects and everything, into a new media file. And then that new file, it plays back smoothly, even if your system was struggling with all those effects before.
So it's like lightening the load on your system, especially in those sections with a ton of effects or transitions.
Yes.
Okay, what else is on the list of DaVinci discoveries?
Let's talk transitions. DaVinci Resolve has a lot of built-in transitions, we know that. But what's cool is how much you can customize them. It's not just about slapping on a cross dissolve and calling it a day. You have control over every little detail.
And that's where those transition curves come in handy, right?
Yes. With those curves, you can fine-tune the speed, the shape, even the opacity of your transitions. You can get really creative with it. It's like having a whole animation toolkit just for transitions.
Love it. So you can create those transitions that perfectly match your edit, rather than just settling for the default look.
Exactly. It's all about those details. And speaking of details, let's not forget about titles. The text plus title generator in Resolve 19 is a game changer.
Oh, yeah. I've been playing around with that one. It's so much more powerful now. It's like having a mini After Effects right inside DaVinci Resolve.
Right. You've got those advanced styling options. You can animate your text, even create those more complex shape-based layouts. And you don't have to leave Resolve to do any of it.
No more bouncing between programs. It's all right there, seamlessly integrated.
Exactly. Makes a huge difference in terms of workflow.
Now, this next one is something that I think a lot of editors, even experienced ones, might not fully utilize. Composite modes.
Composite modes. We're not just talking about basic opacity adjustments here. DaVinci Resolve has a whole bunch of them, each with its own unique way of blending layers together.
Think Photoshop blending modes, but for video. You can create glows, you can do subtractive effects, color burns, all sorts of cool stuff.
And these aren't just for individual clips. They get really powerful when you start using them in the color page with the layer mixer node. You can blend different grades of the same shot to create some really interesting looks.
That's next level stuff.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about a panel that might seem a bit intimidating at first glance. The audio configuration panel.
Yeah, this is where you can really dive deep into how your audio is routed and organized within your project. Think of it as mission control for your audio.
Your virtual audio patch bay right there in DaVinci Resolve.
Exactly. You can remap channels, enable or disable specific audio tracks. Super helpful when you're working with clips that have a mix of audio formats.
Oh yeah, that's a lifesaver. No more battling with mismatched audio channels or weird routing issues.
And here's a cool trick. You can actually remap the channels within individual clips to appear as separate items on your timeline.
Whoa, wait a minute. So you're telling me we've got multi-track audio editing capabilities right here in our NLE?
Pretty much. You can edit each channel independently, create new tracks, all without ever leaving DaVinci Resolve.
A game changer. Now let's switch gears for a moment and talk about a feature that's becoming more and more important in this multi-platform world. Smart Reframe.
Oh, Smart Reframe, a lifesaver for anyone creating content for different platforms with different aspect ratios.
Tell me about it. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, they all have their own quirks and dimensions.
And instead of manually reframing every single shot, Smart Reframe analyzes your footage and automatically reframes it for you, keeping your subject in the center of the frame.
And it's not just a simple crop, right? It actually analyzes the footage and tries to keep the composition intact.
Exactly. The AI is surprisingly good at figuring out what's important in the shot and reframing accordingly. It's a huge time saver.
Massive time saver. No more spending hours manually adjusting crops and trying to salvage those awkward compositions.
Seriously, it's a game changer.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about ACE's color management. It's one of those things that can seem a bit intimidating if you're not a color grading guru.
Yeah.
But it's becoming increasingly important in professional workflows.
Yeah, ACS. It's all about consistency, really.
Consistency in what way?
Consistency in how your colors are represented. Think of it like a universal language for color. So what you see on your screen is what your client sees, what the colorist sees, what everyone down the line sees, regardless of what monitor they're using.
So it's about bridging the gap between different devices and applications, making sure everyone's seeing those colors in the same way.
Exactly. No more guessing games or weird color shifts when you move between different systems. And DaVinci Resolve, luckily, it's got incredible ACS support built in.
That's good to know. And since we're on the topic of color and tricky concepts, let's revisit data levels for a minute, but this time in the context of RCM and different color spaces. It's one of those things where a little knowledge can be dangerous because things can get messy quickly if you're not careful.
Totally. And it all comes back to how your image data is being represented, right? But when you throw RCM and different color spaces into the mix,
Things get a bit spicy.
yeah, let's just say you need to be extra careful. Mismatched data levels, especially in those situations, it's a recipe for disaster. Think messed up colors, clipping, all sorts of headaches.
So it's really about understanding how all those pieces fit together, data levels, color spaces, RCM, to make sure your colors are being interpreted correctly at every stage of your workflow.
Exactly. It's like speaking the same language, color-wise.
I like that analogy. Now, let's shift gears to a topic that's becoming increasingly important for anyone working on high-end projects. HDR, specifically the ST.2804 standard.
HDR is huge now. Those amazing, super bright displays, the incredible dynamic range. If you're not working with HDR yet, you will be soon.
For sure. But for those who are new to it, break it down for us. What's the big deal with ST.2084?
So ST.2084 is basically the standard for HDR video. It's what allows for that incredible range of brightness levels that you just don't get with traditional SDR. We're talking brighter highlights, deeper blacks, more detail in those extremes.
Basically, HDR makes your images look more like real life, the way our eyes actually see the world.
Precisely. And the good news is that DaVinci Resolve is fully equipped to handle that whole HDR workflow. You've got everything you need. Dolby Vision, HDR10, you name it.
Wow, so DaVinci's got all the bases covered when it comes to HDR.
Yeah, you can grade your footage, monitor it, deliver it, all within that HDR world. You can even set your scopes to display in nits, which is super helpful for judging those HDR brightness levels.
Talk about a complete package. Now, I noticed you had a note about Cintel scanner footage. That's a very specific type of footage. But for those who work with film, it's a big deal, right?
Oh yeah, for film restoration and those archival projects, it's incredible. DaVinci Resolve works seamlessly with Cintel scanners. You're not just importing scans, you're controlling the scanner itself from inside Resolve.
Whoa, seriously?
Seriously. You can adjust things like the light source intensity, the color temperature, all in real time and see those changes reflected in your footage instantly.
That's amazing. So we can tweak the scan settings on the fly to get the absolute perfect look.
Exactly. It's a game changer for anyone working with film. And once you have those scans in DaVinci Resolve, you've got access to that entire toolkit, color grading, restoration tools, everything.
Talk about a powerful combination. And while we're on the topic of powerful combinations, let's talk about collaborative workflows, specifically the Dropbox replay integration, because sharing projects and getting feedback can be a real pain, especially when you're dealing with large files and multiple collaborators.
Oh, tell me about it. Back and forth emails, confusing feedback, trying to figure out which version is the latest. It's a nightmare.
A nightmare. But Dropbox replay integration aims to change all that, right?
Exactly. You can render your timeline directly to Dropbox Replay from DaVinci Resolve. Your clients can leave their comments, and it's all timecode synced.
So no more trying to decipher vague feedback or trying to remember which timestamp corresponds to which edit.
Exactly. Everything is clear, organized, and trackable. Saves everyone time and headaches.
Sounds like a win-win.
Yeah.
And since we're on the topic of making life easier, let's talk about the Multicam Angle Editor. For multicam projects, this has to be one of those features that once you try it, you can't imagine life without it.
It's a game changer for sure. You've got this visual layout of all your camera angles along a timeline so you can see everything at a glance. And those cuts, they're so much easier to make. You're not just relying on audio cues anymore. You're actually seeing the relationships between the shots.
It's so intuitive. And if you ever need to go back to that more traditional multicam view, you can switch back and forth seamlessly.
Yep, the best of both worlds.
For sure. Now, let's talk about another feature that can be a lifesaver for complex projects. Nested timelines.
Ah, nested timelines. Think of them like those mini timelines within your main timeline. You can edit a bunch of clips together in a nested timeline, apply effects, color grade it, whatever you want, and then that entire nested timeline, it becomes like one single clip on your main timeline.
So it's a way of organizing your project into those manageable chunks, especially when you're dealing with a lot of footage or a lot of different elements.
Exactly. It keeps everything organized, keeps you sane.
And you can apply grades, effects, or transitions, all that good stuff to those those nested timelines, just like you would with a regular clip.
Precisely. Makes it super easy to create those reusable elements or even just to keep your effects organized.
Speaking of organization, how about we give some love to the scene cut detection tool? Anyone who works with a lot of raw, uncut footage, this one's for you.
This is another one of those AI-powered features in DaVinci Resolve that feels like magic.
It analyzes your footage and automatically finds those scene changes for you, so you don't have to spend hours manually scrubbing through everything.
Exactly. And you can adjust the sensitivity if needed. You can manually review those cut points so you're not just at the mercy of the algorithm, but it can save you so much time.
A huge time saver. Now let's talk audio syncing, because for those of us who work with external audio recorders, accurate syncing is critical.
Absolutely crucial. And thankfully, DaVinci Resolve has some really powerful audio syncing tools.
Like what? What makes them stand out?
Well, it doesn't matter if you're using timecode or waveform matching, Resolve can handle it. And it can sync multiple audio tracks to your video with frame accuracy.
And if things are a little off, you can fine-tune those sync offsets really precisely.
Oh, absolutely. You have total control.
Now, this next one is a bit of a niche feature, but for certain tasks, it's incredibly useful. External mats.
Ah, yes, external mats. For those who want to get really creative and precise with their effects or color grading, it's like bringing in those digital stencils or masks from other programs.
You create those mats in something like Photoshop or After Effects, and then bring them into Resolve to isolate specific areas of your image.
Exactly. So you could use an external mat to apply a color grade to only a certain part of your image, or you could use it to create really intricate visual effects.
Very cool. It's like having another layer of creative control.
Exactly. And you can even animate those external mats so those masks can move with your footage.
That's powerful. Now let's move on to a simple but essential tool for keeping track of our footage. Flags.
Ah, flags. They're like those little virtual sticky notes you can put on your clips without actually altering the footage itself.
Exactly. Like good take, needs work, use this one, whatever works for you.
Exactly. And you can combine those flags with smart bins to organize your footage automatically.
Love it. And speaking of organization, let's not forget about keywords.
Right. While flags are great for those quick visual cues, keywords let you get a lot more specific. Think of them as adding those tags or labels to your clips.
So instead of just flagging a clip as a good take, you could add keywords like close-up, dialogue, or exterior shot to make it super easy to find later on.
Exactly. When you've got a mountain of footage, those keywords can be a lifesaver.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about those subtle flaws that we often need to fix in post, let's talk about lens distortion. Even the best lenses can introduce a bit of distortion, especially those wide-angle lenses.
Yeah, and those little imperfections can really detract from the overall look of your footage.
But thankfully, DaVinci Resolve's got our backs with its lens correction tool. Tell us, what can this magical tool do?
It's surprisingly good at automatically analyzing your footage and correcting for those common lens distortions. We're talking about those barrel distortions, that pincushion effect, even vignetting. Of course, you can always manually fine-tune the corrections as well, but the automatic correction is a great starting point.
So even if you're not a lens expert, DaVinci Resolve can help you fix those issues and make your footage look its best.
Exactly. And speaking of AI-powered awesomeness, let's talk about the face recognition tool.
Okay, this one sounds particularly useful.
If you work with footage with a lot of people, interviews, documentaries, that sort of thing, this tool is incredible. It detects and analyzes faces in your footage, and then it gets really smart. It automatically creates those smart bins for each person.
Well, wait a minute. So if I'm working on a documentary with, say, 10 different interviewees, DaVinci Resolve can automatically organize all of my footage based on who's in each shot.
You got it. It's like having a personal assistant for your footage.
That's insane. No more manually sorting through hours of footage trying to find that one shot of a specific person. This is game-changing.
Game-changing is right. Now let's get back to some of the fundamentals for a moment and talk about keyframes.
Keyframes, the building blocks of animation, effects, pretty much anything that moves or changes over time in your edit.
Exactly. And mastering keyframes is essential if you want to take your edits to that next level.
Totally agree. But for those who are just starting out, what are keyframes exactly?
Think of them like those markers on your timeline that let you control how a parameter changes over time. For example, you could use keyframes to make a title slide across the screen, to fade a clip in or out, or to create those smooth animated transitions.
And DaVinci Resolve give you a ton of control over those keyframes.
Oh, absolutely. You can adjust the interpolation between those keyframes. You can create those nice smooth curves for your animations, and you can even copy and paste those keyframes to different parameters. It's a really powerful system.
Really powerful. Now, this next one is subtle, but so useful, especially for those of us who are really hands-on with our audio editing. Audio scrubbing.
Audio scrubbing. It's one of those things you don't realize you need until you try it.
Exactly. For those who haven't experienced the joy of audio scrubbing, tell us, what is it?
It's simple, really. As you scrub through your footage, you actually hear the audio playing back, almost like those old vinyl record players where the pitch changes as you move the needle.
It makes finding those specific sound cues or dialogue lines so much easier.
Absolutely. It adds a whole other level of precision to your audio editing.
Totally agree. Now, let's talk performance optimization. Because when you're working with those high-resolution video files, especially those massive RAW files, things can slow to a crawl.
Oh, tell me about it. 4K, 6K, even 8K footage, it can bring even the most powerful editing systems to their knees.
So how do we keep DaVinci Resolve from turning into a slideshow when we're working with those demanding file formats? Enter optimized media.
Optimized media is a lifesaver. It's like creating a more manageable version of your footage, a smaller, lightweight proxy. But it still retains all the important information from those original files. And the beauty of it is that DaVinci Resolve handles most of this in the background automatically.
So I don't have to manually create those proxies for every single clip.
Not at all. Resolve does the heavy lifting for you, so you can focus on editing.
Music to my ears. Now, let's say we are working on a really complex project. Lots of effects, transitions, multi-layered stuff, and optimized media alone isn't cutting it. What's our next line of defense against those dreaded dropped frames?
The render cache to the rescue.
Ah, yes. The render cache, our secret weapon against lag. Tell us more.
Essentially, the render cache lets you pre-render those complex parts of your timeline. So those effects, those transitions, those multi-layered sections, DaVinci Resolve will process them in advance and store that rendered information in the cache.
So the next time you play back that section of your timeline, it's buttery smooth no matter how complex it is.
Precisely. It's a lifesaver for those demanding projects.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about a feature that's essential for collaborating with other editors, especially those who might be using different editing software. EDLs or edit decision lists.
EDLs. They're like the universal language of editing, right?
Exactly. That way, if I'm working on a project in DaVinci Resolve, but I need to send my edit to someone who's using Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, they can still understand what I've done.
Precisely. And DaVinci Resolve makes it super easy to both export and import EDLs, so you can move your projects between different editing systems without any headaches.
Seamless collaboration, I love it. Now, let's talk about those little things that can make a big difference in our workflow. Timeline markers.
Timeline markers, those trusty little helpers.
They seem so simple, but they're surprisingly useful.
They are. You can use them to mark important points in your timeline. Scene changes, sound effects, visual effects, whatever you need.
They're like those virtual sticky notes for your timeline, right?
Exactly. And you can even use them for more advanced things like snapping edits to specific points or triggering actions.
So, timeline markers, small but mighty. Now let's talk about an issue that can strike fear into the hearts of filmmakers working with older footage.
The process of converting those classic 24 frames per second film frame rates to those video-friendly 29.97 or 30, it can be a pain.
It can introduce those nasty artifacts if not handled correctly. So, how does DaVinci Resolve handle this delicate process?
Like a champ, DaVinci Resolve can automatically detect, pull down, and remove it, restoring your footage to that beautiful 24 fps glory.
So no more worrying about those jittery movements or weird artifacts when working with film footage in a digital world. That's great to know. And since we're on the topic of making things look their best, let's dive back into the world of HDR with a look at the HDR grading tools in DaVinci Resolve.
Oh yeah, HDR grading's a whole other ballgame, but thankfully DaVinci Resolve's got our backs.
Tell us, what makes the HDR grading tool so special?
Well, you've got everything you need. Specialized color wheels, scopes designed specifically for HDR, support for a ton of HDR color spaces and formats, you name it.
So whether we're grading for Dolby Vision, HDR10 Plus or any other HDR flavor of the month, we can be confident that DaVinci Resolve can handle it.
Absolutely. It's got all the bells and whistles for professional HDR work.
That's awesome to hear. Now, let's talk about those mystical files that can transform the look of our footage with just a few clicks. Custom LUTs.
LUTs. Our secret sauce for creating unique looks or matching color between different cameras.
So, For those who might be new to this, what exactly is a LUT and why should we be excited about them?
Think of a LUT, or lookup table, as a set of color transformations that you apply to your footage all at once, like those Instagram filters for your videos, but way more powerful and precise.
So if I want my footage to have that classic Hollywood look, that gritty film noir vibe, or that dreamy, ethereal feel, I can probably find a LUT to help me get there.
Exactly. You can find LUTs online, or you can even create your own if you're feeling adventurous. And DaVinci Resolve, of course, makes it super easy to import and use those LUTs in your projects.
That's fantastic. Now let's move on to a feature that's becoming increasingly relevant as immersive technologies gain traction. Stereo 3D tools.
Stereo 3D, it's not just for those big-budget Hollywood movies anymore.
It's making its way into VR, art installations, all sorts of cool projects. So how does DaVinci Resolve handle the challenge of working with this unique format?
Really well, actually. You can edit, grade, and even composite stereo 3D footage all within DaVinci Resolve, and it supports a variety of 3D formats.
So if a client comes to me with a project destined for those giant 3D IMAX screens or even a VR headset, I can confidently say, yeah, DaVinci Resolve can handle that.
Exactly. It's got all the tools you need for those next-level 3D projects.
That's awesome. Now let's switch gears to a more practical and, let's be honest, sometimes tedious aspect of video editing: burn-ins.
Ah, yes, burn-ins. Those essential but not always exciting pieces of information that we often need to embed into our footage.
Time code, real names, client logos, all that good stuff.
Huh.
We don't always want them there in the final product, but they're essential for certain deliverables.
For sure, and DaVinci Resolve makes it really easy to add those burn-ins without any hassle. You can add text, graphics, logos, and control all the usual things like positioning, size, and opacity.
And it's all integrated into DaVinci Resolve, so no need for any clunky workarounds or third-party software, right?
Exactly. It's all right there at your fingertips.
Fantastic. And since we're on the topic of tools that make our lives easier, let's talk about another one of those game-changing integrations: Frame.io.
Oh, Frame.io, a lifesaver for collaboration and client feedback.
Now, we talked about Dropbox Replay earlier.
Yeah.
Is Frame.io similar in terms of how it integrates with DaVinci Resolve?
It is. Think of it as another option for getting that streamlined review and approval process. You can upload your timelines directly to Frame.io. Clients can leave those timecode-specific comments, all that good stuff.
So no more deciphering vague feedback emails or trying to remember what that one note at 1 minute 30 seconds was referring to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Frame.io just makes collaboration so much smoother. And it's cloud-based, so everyone involved can access the latest version of the project no matter where they are.
Love it. Now let's talk about a feature that's easy to overlook, especially if you're new to DaVinci Resolve: the Fairlight audio page.
Ugh, Fairlight. It's like having a professional-grade audio studio right there inside DaVinci Resolve.
For those who might not be familiar with it, tell us, what exactly is Fairlight?
Essentially, it's DaVinci Resolve's built-in digital audio workstation, or DAW, and it's incredibly powerful. You can record, edit, mix, and even master your audio all within the same software you're using for video editing.
So no more bouncing between different programs to get our audio sounding its best.
Exactly. And because it's all part of DaVinci Resolve, it's all seamlessly integrated. You can tweak your audio while you're editing your video. It's all connected.
It's like having the best of both worlds. Now let's shift gears and talk about something that's essential for anyone working with footage from those high-end cameras that capture all that delicious raw data: camera raw controls.
Raw footage gives you so much flexibility, but it also requires a bit more finesse to get it looking its best, and that's where those raw controls come in.
So it's not just a matter of dropping those raw files into our timeline and hoping for the best.
Not quite. Raw footage, it's like that unbaked cake. It's got all the ingredients, but you need to put in a little work to turn it into something amazing. And DaVinci Resolve's camera raw controls. They give you that control.
I love that analogy. So what kind of control are we talking about here?
You can fine-tune the debayering process, which is how that raw data gets converted into a viewable image. You can adjust white balance, exposure, lens corrections, all sorts of things. And you're doing all of this before you even get to the color grading stage.
So you're essentially setting the foundation for your grade, making sure that raw footage is looking its absolute best before you even start playing with color.
Precisely. It's about getting the most out of that raw data.
I love it. And speaking of getting the most out of our tools, let's talk about the Neural Engine. This is DaVinci Resolve's secret weapon for all sorts of AI-powered magic.
The Neural Engine. It's working behind the scenes, making our lives easier and our edits better.
Give us the rundown. What kind of AI-powered goodness does this neural engine bring to the table?
It's involved in a ton of stuff. Object tracking, face recognition, upscaling footage, noise reduction, and even more.
So if I need to track a moving object, isolate someone's face, or even just make my footage a bit sharper, the neural engine can probably help me do it faster and better than I could manually.
You got it. And it's only getting more powerful with each new version of DaVinci Resolve.
Very cool. All right, let's switch gears to something that's essential for accessibility and reaching a wider audience. Subtitles.
Subtitles. They don't always get the attention they deserve, but they're so important.
So true. So tell us, how does DaVinci Resolve handle the often dreaded task of creating and implementing subtitles?
Really well, actually. And don't worry, we're not talking about those clunky, ugly subtitles that look like they were created in Notepad. DaVinci Resolve has really powerful subtitling tools built in.
Like what? Give us the details.
Well, you can create those professional-looking subtitles in all the standard formats. SRT, VTT, even those fancy XML-based formats.
And we got control over the styling, right? Fonts, sizes, colors, all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah. You have total control. You can position them wherever you want, add background boxes to make them easier to read. The works.
Fantastic. It's all about making sure those subtitles are easy on the eyes and don't distract from the viewing experience. Now let's talk about another aspect of modern video editing that can be a real headache, delivering our videos to those various social media platforms.
Yes, the joys of social media delivery. So many platforms, so many different formats, so many resolutions to keep track of.
It can be a nightmare. So how does DaVinci Resolve help us navigate this social media minefield?
Well, it's got your back. DaVinci Resolve has built-in presets for all the major social media platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it.
So no more fiddling around with export settings, trying to remember the optimal resolution or frame rate for each platform. Resolve's got it all figured out.
It does. You just choose your platform, select the preset, and hit export.
That's incredible. Now let's talk about those less glamorous but oh so important features that are essential for any editor who values their sanity. Project backups.
Project backups. Every editor's best friend. Because we've all been there. You're working on a project, hours of work invested, and then boom, crash. Data loss.
Don't even get me started. Just thinking about it gives me chills. So tell us, how does DaVinci Resolve help us protect ourselves from those digital disasters?
Well, the good news is that DaVinci Resolve can automatically back up your projects. You can even customize how often it backs up and how many versions it keeps.
So if something catastrophic does happen, I can breathe a sigh of relief knowing I've got a recent backup to fall back on.
Exactly. No more sleepless nights worrying about losing all your hard work.
Music to my ears. And while we're on the topic of things that make us want to tear our hair out, let's talk about color matching.
Color matching. The bane of many an editor's existence. Especially when you're dealing with footage from different cameras or sources, getting everything to look consistent can feel like an impossible task.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark sometimes. But DaVinci Resolve has a few tricks up its sleeve to make color matching a little less painful.
It does. The color match feature is surprisingly powerful. It can analyze different clips and match their color automatically.
Wait a minute. So you're telling me if I have a scene with shots from two different cameras or even a mix of film and video, DaVinci Resolve can make those shots look like they were all filmed with the same camera?
Pretty much. It's not always perfect, and sometimes you might need to do a bit of manual tweaking, but it can get you 90% of the way there in seconds.
Amazing. So it's like having a virtual colorist assistant who can handle those initial color matching tasks, freeing you up to focus on the creative finessing.
Exactly. Now let's talk about something that can add a touch of drama, impact, or just plain coolness to our edits. Slow motion and time remapping.
Slow motion. It's a classic for a reason. Whether you're going for that epic cinematic feel or just want to highlight a specific moment, slow motion can transform your footage.
Absolutely. And DaVinci Resolve gives you so much control over your slow motion. You can fine-tune the speed with frame accuracy. You can choose from different interpolation methods to get that perfect smoothness.
We can create those freeze frame moments, those whip pans, all sorts of cool stuff.
Exactly. And let's not forget about time remapping, which lets you do those speed ramps and more experimental time-based effects. DaVinci Resolve can handle it all.
Very cool. Now, this next one might not be something you use on every project, but when you need it, you need it. Multi-screen outputs.
Yes. For those projects that go beyond the single-screen concerts, events, installations, that sort of thing.
Imagine you're editing a concert video and you've got those multiple camera angles that you want to display simultaneously on different screens, all synced up perfectly.
Uh-huh.
Or you're creating an art installation with video projections that interact with each other in real time. That's what multi-screen outputs allow you to do.
Exactly. It's not just about having multiple screens. It's about controlling those screens, synchronizing them, creating that immersive experience for the viewer. And DaVinci Resolve makes it surprisingly easy to set up and manage those multi-screen outputs.
It's like having your own personal control room right there in your editing software.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about something that can be a real buzzkill when it comes to audio quality. Noise floor.
Noise floor. That pesky background hiss, hum, or rumble that can creep into our audio recordings and make us cringe. It's like the unwanted guest at the party that just won't stop talking.
Exactly. But luckily, DaVinci Resolve comes equipped with its very own noise-canceling headphones in the form of its Fairlight noise reduction plugin.
So this is like a magic noise-removing tool built right into DaVinci Resolve.
Pretty much. It uses some clever algorithms to analyze your audio and intelligently remove that background noise without destroying the quality of your audio.
So whether it's a dialogue track with a bit of hiss or a music track with some hum in the background, DaVinci Resolve can help us clean it up and make it sound pristine.
Exactly. Now let's talk about protecting our precious work, because in this day and age of content being shared everywhere, you never know who might try to pass off your work as their own.
Ugh, don't even get me started. Copyright infringement is a real problem, and protecting our work is more important than ever. So, how can DaVinci Resolve help us fight back against those content thieves?
Well, it doesn't have a dedicated watermark removal tool, which, considering we wouldn't want to make life too easy for those who steal content, is probably a good thing.
Good point. So how can we use DaVinci Resolve to remove those pesky watermarks?
Well, depending on the watermark, those masking and compositing tools we talked about earlier, those can come in handy. Especially if it's a static watermark or even semi-transparent, you can often remove it or at least make it much less noticeable.
So with a bit of creativity and those powerful DaVinci Resolve tools, we can reclaim our footage and tell those copyright infringers to back off.
Exactly. Now let's move on to something a bit more exciting, motion graphics. Because in today's visually driven world, just having great looking video isn't enough. You need to grab the viewer's attention, right?
Oh, absolutely. Motion graphics are essential for making our videos pop, whether it's with animated titles, those cool lower thirds, eye-catching transitions, or even just some subtle visual effects.
And the good news is that DaVinci Resolve doesn't disappoint when it comes to motion graphics.
It does. It really does. So for those who are ready to take their motion graphics game to the next level, what does DaVinci Resolve have in store for them?
Well, we have to talk about the Fusion page. It's DaVinci Resolve's dedicated visual effects and motion graphics environment, and it is incredibly powerful.
It's like having a whole other professional level application hidden inside DaVinci Resolve.
Exactly. But don't be intimidated if you're not a visual effects guru. DaVinci Resolve also has more approachable motion graphics tools like the Text Plus title generator, which is perfect for creating those quick professional-looking titles and lower thirds.
And don't forget about the effects library, chock full of pre-built effects and transitions that you can just drag and drop right onto your timeline.
Exactly. There's something for everyone in DaVinci Resolve, no matter your skill level.
Love it. Now let's get back to basics for a moment and talk about a technique that's as old as filmmaking itself. Cropping.
Cropping. Sometimes you need to reframe your shots, and cropping is the way to do it right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to fine-tune that composition or remove something distracting from the edge of the frame.
And DaVinci Resolve gives you a lot of flexibility in how you crop your footage. You can do those quick and dirty crops right in the edit page, or you can get more precise and creative with your crops in the Fusion page using masks and transforms, that kind of thing.
So whether you're a fan of the edit page or the Fusion page, DaVinci Resolve has a cropping solution for you. Now let's talk about something that can make even the most beautifully shot footage look amateur. Shaky camera movements.
Ugh, shaky footage. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's from handheld shooting or just a bit of camera shake, it can be really distracting.
And in the past, fixing shaky footage often meant sacrificing some of the image quality or resorting to those expensive, clunky stabilization rigs.
Thankfully, those days are over. DaVinci Resolve's stabilization tool is here to save the day.
It's like having a virtual Steadicam operator built right into the software. But tell us, what makes DaVinci Resolve stabilization so special?
It's not just about creating that super smooth, floating through air look, although it can certainly do that if that's what you're going for. It's about analyzing those unwanted camera movements, those little bumps and shakes, and smoothing them out while still maintaining the natural feel of the shot.
So it's not going to make your footage look like it was shot on rails.
Exactly. You don't want to lose that organic feel. And the best part is that DaVinci Resolve's stabilization tool gives you a ton of control over the process.
Like what? What kind of control are we talking about?
Well, you can adjust the strength of the stabilization, so you can decide how much smoothing you want. You can even define areas of interest within your frame, so you can tell DaVinci Resolve to focus on stabilizing a specific part of the image while leaving other areas untouched.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. So if I want to smooth out the camera shake in a shot, but still maintain the natural movement of a subject's hand, for example, I can tell DaVinci Resolve to focus on stabilizing everything but that hand.
You got it. It's that level of control that makes DaVinci Resolve's stabilization tool so impressive.
Very impressive. Now let's talk about another one of those fundamental editing techniques that can be used in countless creative ways. Zooming.
Zooming. It seems so simple, right? But a well-placed zoom can completely change the feel of a shot.
For sure. It can add drama, create a sense of unease, emphasize a particular detail. So many possibilities. And with DaVinci Resolve, we're not limited to those boring linear zooms either, right?
Absolutely not. We've got options. You can do those smooth cinematic zooms. You can do those quick punchy zooms with motion blur. You can even get really wild with it and create those crazy twisting turning zooms that defy the laws of physics.
Love it. Now let's talk about something that might sound a bit intimidating, but can unlock a whole new level of control and creativity within DaVinci Resolve. Expressions.
Expressions. Now, I know the word might sound scary, especially if you're not a coder or a mathematician.
Yeah, I can see how the word expressions might send some editors running for the hills.
But honestly, expressions are not as complicated as they sound.
Break it down for us. What exactly is an expression, and why should we be excited about them?
Think of an expression as a way to control how a parameter changes over time using, let's call it, mathematical instructions. So instead of manually setting those keyframes to make something move across the screen, you could use an expression to define that movement mathematically.
So instead of telling DaVinci Resolve where you want something to be at each keyframe, you're telling it how you want it to move.
Exactly. You're basically giving it the rules and it figures out the rest. And the great thing about expressions is that they can be incredibly precise and efficient.
And once you've created an expression, you can save it and reuse it in other projects, right?
Absolutely. Expressions can be huge time savers. And they're not just for motion either. You can use expressions to control all sorts of things in DaVinci Resolve, from color grading parameters to audio effects. It's really about unlocking that next level of control and flexibility.
I love that. It's all about working smarter, not harder. Now let's move on to a more fundamental aspect of image control, one that's essential for making our footage look its best. White balance.
White balance. It's one of those things that when it's right, nobody notices, but when it's wrong, it's all anyone can see.
Exactly. Those weird color casts, the sickly yellow or green tints, those can really ruin the look of your footage. So how does DaVinci Resolve help us wrangle those white balance woes?
It gives you a lot of control, that's for sure. You can correct those color casts really easily with DaVinci Resolve's intuitive tools, and you can even get creative and manipulate the white balance to evoke certain moods or feelings.
So if I wanted to make a scene feel warmer and more inviting, I could shift the white balance towards those warmer tones.
Exactly. Or if you want to give a scene a colder, more sterile feel, you could shift the balance towards the cooler end of the spectrum.
It's all about using white balance as a creative tool, not just a technical fix. Now, let's switch gears again and talk about another one of those audio essentials, managing clipping.
Clipping. The bane of beautiful audio, those nasty pops, clicks, and distortion that can ruin an otherwise perfect recording.
We've all been there, listening back to our audio with those wincing ears.
It's not a good feeling. But thankfully, DaVinci Resolve has some great tools for avoiding those clipping disasters.
Like what? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, for starters, DaVinci Resolve's audio metering is really good. You can see those audio levels really clearly, so you know if you're getting close to that clipping point. And if those peaks do happen to sneak through, well, there's always the limiter effect, which can help tame those overly enthusiastic peaks without ruining the dynamic range of your audio.
Love it. So we've got tools for prevention and tools for damage control. Now let's talk about a concept that often confuses people new to video editing. Gamma.
Ah, gamma. It's one of those things that sounds really technical, but it's actually quite simple once you understand it.
Break it down for us. What is gamma in a nutshell?
Essentially, gamma affects the brightness of your image, but it's not just about making things brighter or darker overall. It's about controlling the relationship between those brightness levels in your image.
Okay, and why should we care about gamma? How does it affect our edits?
Well, if you're not happy with the overall contrast of your image, adjusting the gamma can help. If your shadows are too dark or your highlights are too bright, playing with the gamma can bring those areas back into balance.
So it's a powerful tool for fine-tuning the overall look and feel of your footage.
Exactly. And DaVinci Resolve gives you a lot of control over gamma, so you can really fine-tune it to your liking.
Now let's talk about something that might seem a bit counterintuitive in this digital age. Adding grain.
Grain.
Yeah.
It seems weird, right? Why would we want to add grain to our perfectly clean digital footage?
Yeah, I remember back in the day, we used to spend hours, days even, trying to get rid of grain in our film footage.
It's funny how things come full circle, but you're right. Sometimes a little bit of grain can add a certain texture or feel.
It can make digital footage feel more organic, more filmic.
Precisely. And that's where DaVinci Resolve's film grain effect comes in.
Okay, tell us more. What can we do with this film grain effect?
You have complete control over the grain, the size, the intensity, the type. You can even emulate the look of different film stocks.
So if I want to give my footage that classic 35mm film look,
Right.
I can just slap on some film grain in DaVinci Resolve.
Pretty much. You can get really specific with it too. Want that gritty Super 8 look? There's a grain setting for that. Want something a bit more subtle and refined? DaVinci Resolve's got you covered.
Amazing. So we're not just stuck with that generic one-size-fits-all film grain. We've got options. Now let's talk about a concept that's closely related to grain, but can be a bit tricky to master. Sharpness.
Sharpness, it's so easy to go overboard with, right?
It's like that spice rack in your kitchen.
Yeah.
A little dash of sharpness can enhance the flavor of your image, but too much, ugh, it's like biting into a mouthful of pepper.
Exactly. And in this world of 4K, 8K, everyone's chasing that razor-sharp look. But sometimes a little bit of softness can actually make your footage look more natural and appealing.
Absolutely. So how does DaVinci Resolve help us find that sweet spot between too soft and overly sharpened?
DaVinci Resolve's sharpen effect is incredibly powerful. You're not just cranking up the sharpness globally. You can control how much sharpening is applied, the radius of the sharpening effect. You can even target specific areas of your image for sharpening while leaving other areas untouched.
Whoa! Okay, so if I have a shot where the subject's face is a little bit soft, but the background is tack sharp, I can use DaVinci Resolve to sharpen just the face without making the background look weird.
You got it. It's that level of control that makes all the difference.
Love it. Now let's talk about one of those features that can save you a ton of time and headaches, especially if you find yourself repeating the same tasks over and over again in your edits. Presets.
Presets.
Yeah.
Every editor's secret weapon.
Seriously, presets are like those pre-made recipes in the kitchen. They give you that great starting point, and you can always tweak them to your liking. And DaVinci Resolve comes with a ton of built-in presets, right?
Oh, yeah. You've got presets for color grading, for effects, for titles. You name it, there's probably a preset for it.
So whether I'm going for that classic Hollywood look, that gritty documentary feel, or that dreamy romantic vibe, DaVinci Resolve has a preset that can help me get started.
Exactly. And the best part is that you can always use those presets as a starting point and then customize them to your heart's content.
Speaking of customization, let's talk about a fundamental aspect of image control that can drastically affect the mood and feel of your footage. Exposure.
Exposure is all about light, right? Making sure that our images are bright enough to see, but not so bright that we lose all the detail in the highlights.
Exactly. And DaVinci Resolve gives us those fine-grained controls over exposure, so we can really dial in the perfect look for our footage. We're not just talking about making things brighter or darker. We're talking about shaping the light, enhancing the mood.
Precisely. You can create those dramatic, high-contrast looks, or you can go for a softer, more low-key aesthetic. It's really up to you.
It's like having a virtual lighting kit right there in your editing software.
Now let's dive back into the world of audio with a look at dynamic range. Dynamic range. The difference between the quietest and loudest parts of your audio, it's what gives your audio depth and emotion.
Exactly. Think about a movie soundtrack. You want to hear those quiet, subtle moments, but you also want to feel the impact of those big, loud moments. That's dynamic range at work.
And managing that dynamic range is crucial for making sure your audio sounds balanced and polished. Too much dynamic range, and those quiet parts might get lost in the mix. Not enough, and everything will sound flat and lifeless.
So how does DaVinci Resolve help us find that sweet spot, that perfect balance of dynamic range?
Well, DaVinci Resolve has a whole bunch of tools for controlling the dynamics of your audio. You've got compressors, limiters, expanders, you name it.
So whether I need to tame a particularly dynamic audio track or just give a little bit of life to a flat-sounding recording, DaVinci Resolve has the tools I need.
Absolutely. You have all the control you need to make your audio sound its best.
And since we're on the topic of making things sound their best, let's not forget about color space. Now, this might seem more like a visual concept, but color space is just as important for audio as it is for video.
You got it. Just like with video, where you've got different color spaces like REC Pot 709 for broadcast or DCI-P3 for digital cinema, audio has its own set of color spaces.
Okay, so walk us through it. What do we need to know about color space in the context of audio?
Well, the most important thing is to make sure that your audio is being monitored and delivered in the correct color space for its intended destination. Otherwise, you could end up with audio that sounds dull, muddy, or just plain wrong.
So if we're working on a project that's going to be broadcast on television, we need to make sure that our audio is in the correct color space for broadcast.
Exactly. And thankfully, DaVinci Resolve makes it easy to manage those audio color space settings. You can set your project's color space, and DaVinci Resolve will handle all the conversions behind the scenes.
Love it. One less thing to worry about. Okay, let's talk about a technique that allows us to seamlessly blend different pieces of footage together, creating those impossible shots that make people wonder, how did they do that? I'm talking about chroma keying.
Chroma keying, or green screening, as it's more commonly known. It's how we send our actors to space, make them fly, or shrink them down to the size of ants.
Exactly. And while chroma keying used to be a technique reserved for those big budget productions with their fancy studios and teams of compositing experts, it's now accessible to everyone thanks to powerful tools like DaVinci Resolve.
Absolutely. And DaVinci Resolve's chroma key tool is surprisingly easy to use, even if you're new to this whole compositing thing. With just a few clicks, you could isolate your subject, remove that green or blue background, and composite them onto a new background with amazing accuracy.
So I don't need to be a visual effects wizard to pull off those convincing chroma key shots.
Not at all. DaVinci Resolve's got you covered. And if you do want to fine-tune the results, DaVinci Resolve's got a bunch of tools for refining those edges, smoothing out those transitions, and making sure your composites look as realistic as possible.
I love it. Okay, let's shift gears back to motion for a moment and talk about motion blur.
Motion blur. It's one of those subtle but important details that can make a huge difference in how our videos look and feel.
It's something we often take for granted in the real world, but in the world of video, motion blur doesn't always happen naturally, especially if you're shooting at high frame rates or working with computer-generated imagery.
Exactly. And without motion blur, things can look a little jarring, a little too crisp and digital. But with DaVinci Resolve, we can add that natural-looking motion blur back into our footage, making it more pleasing to the eye.
So we can use motion blur to smooth out those fast-moving objects, make our animations look more fluid, and generally give our footage a more cinematic feel.
Exactly. And with DaVinci Resolve, you have tons of control over that motion blur. You can adjust the amount of blur, the direction, you name it.
And finally, let's wrap up this deep dive into DaVinci Resolve with a look at a feature that can be a real lifesaver, especially for those of us who work on large, complex projects with lots of repetitive tasks. Macros.
Macros, every editor's best friend. They're those little automated shortcuts that can save you hours of time and frustration.
They're like having a team of virtual assistants at your beck and call, ready to perform those tedious, repetitive tasks so you don't have to.
Exactly. And the beauty of macros in DaVinci Resolve is that they're so easy to create and use. You literally just record yourself doing something once, and then you can assign that sequence of actions to a keyboard shortcut or a button.
So if I find myself constantly adjusting the same color grading settings, applying the same crop, or doing the same audio mix, I can create a macro to do it all for me with a single click or keystroke.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about. Working smarter, not harder, so you can spend more time on the creative stuff and less time wrestling with your software.
I love it. And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into the wonderful world of DaVinci Resolve. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those fundamental editing techniques to those advanced features that can really unlock the full potential of this powerful software.
It's been a blast exploring all these amazing features with you.
Absolutely. And a huge thank you to you, our resident DaVinci Resolve expert, for sharing your knowledge and insights with us today.
My pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, keep experimenting, keep pushing the boundaries, and most importantly, keep creating amazing things with DaVinci Resolve. Until next time, happy editing.